talk about something that I guess is quite fundamental to what we're doing on this group, in this membership group, and that's abstracting the landscape. Now, obviously there's so many different ways that you could do that, but I'm out here and what I want to do is just talk about a couple of things that I do in order to make it a little bit easier to see the landscape in a slightly more abstracted way, what that means to me, because the term abstraction, abstracted, abstract, they're a bit woolly, a little bit vague. So I think a lot of the time it comes down to how you feel about it and what it means to you. So what I want to talk about in this video while I'm doing some painting is some of the practical things that I do, a couple of practical processes that I go through, the way that I approach painting and positioning myself in the landscape to help me get a view that I want and the kind of image that I want. But also what abstraction means to me in the terms of the way I paint and why I choose to paint in that particular way. So what does abstraction mean to me in my work? I think the main thing, the most important thing, is that rather than trying to make a picture of a place and position things as they are in reality, trees over here, there's the hills behind me, the clouds, things like that, rather than trying to make an image which positions all those things correctly, if you like, on the page, what I want to do in my work is actually express something about how the landscape makes me feel, how the experience of the landscape, of being out in the landscape, can be communicated onto the paper and worked with later on, and then worked up into studio painting. So it's that experience of being out in the landscape is the most important thing. And I know I've said it before, I know I repeat it, but it is just fundamental to the way I think about it. And because that's in my mind all the time, that helps me. So having this attitude, having a particular attitude towards your work, knowing what it is that you want out of your work when you're doing it, is enormously helpful, because you could come to a place like this and start drawing, and you're going to end up drawing the horizon of this hill behind me. Down here, I'll show you in a little while, there's a river and a pathway, and you can start just drawing those things and putting them in without really thinking about what you're doing, and ending up with a bit of a picture or a series of pictures of just things, objects, shapes. And it doesn't really mean anything, but because I know that what I'm trying to do is to put across the experience of being in the landscape, I've got that in the back of my mind. It doesn't necessarily have to be, I don't have to be too technical about it or worry about it all the time. It's just having that idea in my mind that I'm trying to paint the experience of what it's like to be here, rather than trying to get it right, air quotes, because, okay, let's get down to it. What is real? What is right? What is reality in the terms of making artwork? And it's not painting. Painting is not real. It's not reality. Out here, we've got an enormous space. It's three-dimensional. There's space everywhere I look. There's just room and this three-dimensional sense of scale. Now, when I start to paint that, I'm going to be translating that onto a two-dimensional surface, a flat surface. So immediately you're changing something, you're taking away a dimension. We've only got 4 dimensions. We've got 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. And immediately I'm taking one of them away just by what I'm doing. And it's the same with taking a photograph. You take a photograph and you're taking a 3-dimensional space that's full of room, and there's space over there that you can't see, there's space behind me, there's space down here that you can't see. So I'm taking this, if you take a picture of it, all you're doing is taking a slice, you're taking a snapshot, and you're making that choice. And again, you're going from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions. You're just taking a snapshot. And you can't get everything in, so you're making those choices. And it's the same with painting, same with photography. You're making choices. It's you that are making the choices of what to put in your image, whether it's a photo or a painting, a sketch or a studio painting. You have to choose, you have to decide. And that is really what I'm talking about. It's imparting the experience, my experience of being in this landscape. Not anyone else's. Someone else might make a different choice. They might make completely different choices. In fact, I'm sure they will. And when I do my workshops, when I do my live workshops in particular, I always find it quite fascinating that we will go out into the landscape with the same materials in the same place, same time of day, and everybody's work is completely different. And I always find that really interesting because it just tells you on a completely practical level that the landscape painting is not about the landscape that's in front of you, it's about the person who's making the image. And so in this video, for this project, I just want you to think about what abstraction means to you, not necessarily what it means to me, but what it means to you, and think about some of the ways that you can help yourself to find or get closer to the sorts of work that you think you would want to produce. One of the things I like to do on a practical level when I'm coming out into the landscape to do some painting is to think about my angle, the angle at which I'm viewing the landscape. And one of the things I do a lot, and I find that it really helps me to see the landscape in a slightly more individual way, is to change my viewing angle by coming up quite high. So what I've done here is I've just climbed a little bit up a hill. It's not too high up. It's quite steep where I am at the moment, but I came up a much shallower shallower route. So I'm looking down on the landscape as much as I'm looking out across the landscape, and that really helps because this slightly a more sort of bird's eye view really flattens things out a bit. So when you're approaching your own work, have a think about that. It doesn't necessarily mean you'd have to go climbing a mountain or something to look at. There's always places you can get to, even if you're sitting in a car, you can find somewhere where you could park up. If you go for a drive, you could park up in a lay-by maybe somewhere where you can get a different kind of view. And it does help a lot because it sort of brings the landscape up towards you a little bit and flattens it out. You get this slightly bird's eye view, like I was saying. And things that look maybe a little bit very familiar, really familiar, like down here there's the pathway and the river. When I know that when I'm down there, I'm just thinking about river, because you're looking across, looking across the river and looking down the river, and it's all very familiar. But up here, because it's a little bit more flattened out, and I can see the shape and the line of this river and the pathway that kind of echoes it as well as it goes through. So just immediately, by this simple act of positioning myself somewhere that's slightly different, slightly off the beaten track, and it just gives me this different view. It's a view that's not quite so familiar. And so when I'm painting it, if I start to do some painting now, I'm immediately seeing the landscape in a slightly different way to the experience of being down there at the river level. So just altering my perspective just helps straight away, because you start to see these sort of flattened shapes, and looking across at the hill over the other side, the field shapes are more obvious as well, these gaps between the trees and these little shapes that they're making, and I'll do something with that as I start painting. Looking out behind me here, the dry stone walls are making these lines across the landscape. Now if I was to stay down at the level of the river, I wouldn't be able to see any of that. So, I mean, I certainly could make a different kind of painting from down there, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I know that when I'm down next to that riverbank, what I can see are the trees across the other side of the river, and they're blocking the view of all this fantastic lines that these dry stone walls make. So it's a different view, and just having that slightly altered perspective just helps you to see what's out there in a different way, and I can make different kinds of marks on my paper, and it is a little bit more abstracted, like I said, because it's flattening the shapes, so that can help a lot. As I start painting, I'm going to be talking to you about the things that I'm seeing out here and how I'm responding to them. But on a practical level for this project, I want you to try and think about changing your view of the landscape, and that could be just going out, taking photographs or doing some sketching. You could possibly even draw on some of the previous projects. The one where we were doing written information rather than doing sketching, we're using verbal and words to describe what's there, and then working from those sorts of things. But you don't have to just get high up. It's not just about getting high up. Particularly if you're doing some photographic work using a camera to get some ideas, you can get in close to your subject. If you're out in the landscape, you don't have to do the whole thing. You could get in much closer, and then say you've got a subject, whether it's some foliage or something, or some flowers or some shapes, a pathway, but be close to it. You can get lower down as well, looking across, maybe looking up towards a different subject, and just changing the angle of how you actually see the landscape. Because I think the temptation is that we always see the landscape at eye level, and particularly again when you're taking photos, if you all you ever do is stand up and take a photo like this, then you're always looking across at eye level. And what's a much better way of getting more exciting compositions is to change your angle by holding up the camera or bringing it much lower down, looking across and into a subject, maybe looking at reflections, reflected shapes and colours. Maybe they're being reflected in a river or some architecture. So that's what I want you to look at. I want you to think about changing your view, changing your angle of view. And that idea of looking through things can be quite good, and reflections, those sorts of things can be very useful, just to try and see the world around you in a slightly different way, and not just everything at eye level all the time, because then you're getting a very narrow perspective of what's around you. Okay, let's do a bit of painting, and I'll talk, as I'm doing it, I'll talk about what I'm seeing and what marks I'm making in response to what's out there. Right, let's have a look at doing some painting here, and as I go I'll just chat to you about what I'm seeing and how I'm responding to the things that are in front of me. Now with me, I've just brought my usual palette of paint. So I've got two yellow, oh no, what's that one? That's a burnt sienna, that's good. So black, yellow, white, black, yellow, a bit of yellow ochre, burnt sienna and a Prussian blue. Now as you know, this is my bog standard painting palette, sketching palette. I feel that I know it really well, and I can get what I want just from these few simple paints. So, never say never. Things change over time. This is certainly a palette that has evolved for me over time. But now, at the moment, that's my nice simple sketching palette. and I just keep it really simple, because I want these sessions, these sketching sessions that I do outside, to be as easy as possible, I suppose. I don't want to be complicating my life with materials and having loads of different things to choose from. I think having this palette that I like to use, and that I know I can adjust it and change it and adapt it, it allows me to focus on looking at the landscape that's in front of me, rather than thinking, oh, how am I going to do this? What am I going to use? What should I bring with me? Oh, I wish I'd brought that other thing with me. These are the tools. These are the tools that I'm using, and then I can focus on looking at the landscape and soaking it in, making some marks on the paper. Now, as usual, I like to start with a bit of that kind of sloppy, dark colour, and I'm just looking at the curve of the river. And this was the thing I was saying about changing your angle of view, is that shape of the river, that dark band, is just, it's just something you can't see when you're down at the same level. It's just a completely different view. So I'm just going to start with that dark shape and maybe make this sketch about that. And what I like about this up here as well is that there's a pathway that runs almost sort of parallel. It's kind of slightly different, but it's making the shape of the river is a bit more tightly curved than the path, and the pathway sort of goes like this across. Oh yeah, I've got some drawing materials with me as well, but I always like to have a few things to draw with as well. But that pathway has a slightly different angle to it. It's a little shallower, and the two of them together make this sort of bow. It's like a bow and arrow. It's like the river's this kind of is the bow, and the pathway's the string. So it's nice to think of those sorts of shapes. So I want to make this sketch about that shape, and then I've got the trees behind there, but also I think I might pull in some of these dry stone walls as well, because I don't want it just to be too much about trees. And this is what I was saying about this, you making the choices. I'm looking around and gazing around, and I don't need to make a picture of everything and trying to get everything in the right place. So I want to say that the things that are out there that are appealing to me are these lines of the dry stone walls, the shape of this curve of the river and this pathway. So maybe I'll bring this down and minimize that space a little bit, and try and just shift everything about a bit, so that I'm putting in the things that I really want to go in, the things that I think are interesting and important, rather than thinking about having to get the right proportion of this grassy area to the river, to the trees, to the hills behind. I can put in this what I want to put into it, and that way, as I was saying before, then the sketch can reflect my experience and my interests, and not simply be about trying to make a picture that is about somebody else looking at it, because someone else might look at it and go, oh, I know where that is, I recognise that. But that's not what it's about. That's not what it's about for me. I'm not worried about that. I want this sketch to reflect the things I'm seeing and the things that I'm interested in while I'm sitting here. So I think what I need to do is start putting in some of this kind of pale green at the front here. It's quite dry at the moment. The grass is quite dry. even though we've had a fair amount of rain this year, everything seems fairly dry at the moment, which is quite nice because it's not too bright green. Let's just get some of that in there. I mean, really the first parts of these sketches, these first few marks that I make, I'm just sort of starting to think about, you know, what I might want in the painting. I don't worry about this line down the middle, by the way. This is just because I fold the paper over when I'm walking. What I do is I have a rucksack here, backpack, with all my stuff in it, all my paints and water and pencils or whatever. And I've just got this back of a sketchbook that I use as a drawing board, and I just fold it over and I tuck this behind the straps behind my back when I'm walking, so I don't have to carry my paper with it flapping around all over the place. But I do get a line down the middle of the paper, but I'd rather work on a large sheet of paper with a fold in it, a bit of a fold in it, than work on a smaller bit of paper that doesn't give me the room to make the marks that I want to. Because what I want to do is get one of my little stubby brushes and just think about applying the paint in a slightly different way. Could do with a toothbrush really, they're quite handy. Because these brushes are so stubby, I can use this as a little stipple. Because I don't want to have just brush marks and just pencil and palette knife marks. I want to be able to get these different, slightly more natural marks in here as well. So let's do a bit of that. Let's get it a little bit darker, get some variety in the colour. That's the other thing I like about working with this green that I use by mixing it with a bit of yellow and a bit of black, is that I can adjust it as I go and just change it, rather than it being something that's coming straight out of a tube. Now I'm just looking at where I've put that original shape of the river going across, and I think I'm going to adjust that down a bit and move it down here a little bit. Let's just put a bit of that paint on, work into that shape a little bit. So I'm thinking of this as the grassy, the grassy area in front of the river bank, and just working that dark shadowy river over the top of it. And I've minimised this a little bit as well because there's rather a lot of it. Let's get a bit more of this green up here. It's kind of behind. Just had that on the brush, so I'll use a bit of that. Now, like I said, I was looking at different ways of pulling colours and shapes into my paintings, and how the things that are out there, how I'm going to respond to them. So I'm looking at the dry stone walls, and they're quite light because it's limestone. They're quite light and they're reflecting quite a lot of the colour from the sky. So I'm going to use this blue pastel to make some marks about the dry stone walls. And also this is going to bring some different shapes into this part of the painting as well. The things I love about these dry stone walls is that they're man-made, but because they've been there for so long, hundreds of years probably, some of them, is that they have this natural quality. They've been built and then they've fallen down and they get rebuilt and they get knocked over by cows and and so they have this fantastic natural quality to them, even though they're manufactured. So I'm looking at those, using that big pastel to kind of think about those shapes, these hillsides, and like I said, they're quite dry. So I think that could do with being a bit lighter. Let's put some of this in, and also give me an opportunity to get some light in. that I can work over in a little while. I think that was all a bit too dark green. I didn't really like it very much, so let's work over that a little bit. Also, down the front here, it's a bit more like this as well. Let's pull this out of the way. Toothbrush is good for this. I should have brought a toothbrush with me. I kind of feel like I know I say you should always work with what you've got rather than what you think you should have. So I'm making do by having my little stipply brush. But if you want to do these little kind of speckle marks, it's quite good. A toothbrush is better because it's quite stiff and you can get these, you can flick it like this. You get a finer kind of mark. Now looking down here as well, there's quite, the pathway is quite bright the way the sun's hitting it, so it brings some of that in. And there's some tree branches over there that I want to make some marks about as well. And these sorts of marks I really enjoy because I'm looking across to the riverbank and there's some sort of dead trees and the branches are really pale. Some more over here. So I just like to make some marks thinking about that, this kind of pale spiky marks. But as you can see, I'm not trying to draw a tree. I'm just trying to make some marks which say something about it to me. Yeah, okay, I just want to make a nice big bold mark across here. There's a nice little dip there where the gap in the foliage at the side of the river. Quite like that. I quite like cutting into, putting this green down is quite nice, and then kind of cutting into it with this colour behind, this dark, this dark shape behind, creates this edge. It's much more interesting to do it this way around, to put the back, this kind of textural paint down first, this green textural paint, and then work over it with something to create an edge. It's a much more interesting way of getting an edge, I think, rather than putting it on top. Okay, now what I'm seeing now, looking at that part of the riverbank, is I'm quite enjoying where there are some marks of trees and branches coming up into that dark, shadowy river behind. Start making some marks in there about that. And a lot of the time, I guess I like this idea of zooming in, but zooming in my mind, zooming in with my eyes. So, I'm looking at I'm looking at this part of the river down there, but from where I am, it's quite a long way away, but I'm sort of thinking about sort of zooming in a little bit with my my attention, because I'm focusing my attention on those particular things. I can just make a little bit more of them. And the other thing that's quite nice down there with the river is that it's got these little weirs. So there's an area here just to my left where the water is like these little mini rapids splashing over the rocks that are down there. I think I'm going to have to blot some of that back because it's really dark, because I can't work over it with it being so wet. So let's knock some of that back, and I can do something with that in a minute when it's dried off a little bit, but I'm just kind of splashy water over the rocks. Now, that I've got here as well in that same area. I mean, as I look around, I kind of focus in on different areas, and then I kind of think about, you know, down here where this little weir is, I've just noticed that there's a quite a large pale shape of this tree. So I'm going to make a mark about that and just think about the shape and the outline of the tree rather than trying to fill it all in. I'm just kind of thinking about this. It's quite a definite outline and it's quite dark behind, so I'll put this down and I might work around it to bring some of that shape out. And now this is starting to come together in a way where I'm finding these different shapes and textures and colours in this painting. And I can start to imagine that when I get back to the studio, I can, you know, do some cropping and find something quite exciting in some different areas here. So, as you know, I always think of these paintings outside as the looking. You know, this is just me looking. And it's the starting point, and you know, these paintings are not the finished artwork. And I think that's so crucial to keep it in your mind, that this is not the finished artwork. That this is the bit where you're looking and observing, noticing things, and then making marks on the paper in response to them. Like I said, you know, getting higher up like this, it really changes my, well, perspective, I suppose, because I'm looking down so much. You know, all these marks are, you know, they feel flatter. Everything feels like it's kind of come up towards me a bit, and it's a bit flatter. And just looking down here, there's some scrubby grass, which has got a little bit of warm tone to it as well. So let's get some of this pastel in here as well, because this is like a soft pastel, but it's quite a good one for bringing in some warmer tones. Because as I look around, there's a fair bit up here in the trees. There's some leaves that look like they're starting to dry off. It's not autumn yet, but it looks like they're thinking about turning. But it was really down here, there's like a little patch of a scrubby, warmer colour. So it's getting there. I don't really want to go too much further with this, I don't think, because I think I'm probably getting in the danger zone of overworking it. I think at the moment there's quite a lot going on, and I think if I'm going to carry on, I'd probably leave it fairly soon, because I don't want to go crazy and overwork it. And I always think you're better off having more paintings, you know, 3 or 4 paintings which are slightly, you know, underworked, and having one overworked painting. I'm just putting in some little flecks of this blue where I can see some slightly deeper shadows, just little shadows here and there. It's quite nice for that. It's quite it's a reddy kind of blue, if you see what I mean. Maybe this one would be better. This one's more of a sort of ultramarine, but this is an oil pastel. I think that will probably help to bring that pathway out, because there's a shadow appearing on the other side of the path. So it's a light sort of limestone gravel, but then it's got this shadow on the other side where the light's hitting it. Just to find the edge of it a little bit. Okay, I think I'm going to have to stop. I'm fiddling. I get to that point, I think you need to recognise that. Sometimes there's a what I call the fiddle phase on paintings, is that you get a load down and then you think, oh, is it done? You know, am I finished? Should I stop? Yeah, I think, you know, you get to this point where you're pushing the paint around and putting loads of stuff down and saying, oh, you know, is it done? Is it done? I don't know. Should I stop? Should I keep going? Don't really like it, but and I've got to keep going because it's no good. And then you start fiddling, and then you just end up with absolutely nothing. So what I like to do is, you know, these first paintings, the first one is always about looking. You know, the first one's always about just getting your eye in. These initial sketches, first couple, are usually just about looking, and I think that that's you know, it's absolutely fine. It's how I like to approach them, is to use the process of sketching to look and to see what's out there, because it's a absolute truism that the more you look, the more you see. So yeah, it's a good fun thing to do, and you know, it's fundamental to my painting process, getting out and painting. But going back to the idea behind the project, as you could see while I was painting, just that very simple idea of changing my angle of view, it just completely alters the way that I see the landscape. Just being up here, looking down, flattening out the perspective a little bit. Instead of looking out, I'm looking down a lot of the time, looking across a little bit at the hills over the other side, but mostly I was looking down. And just, you know, so as you're approaching this project, it doesn't have to be about getting up high. You can lie on the floor, sit on the floor, sit in a chair. Just change the angle of how you actually look at the landscape, and let's not have it all at kind of eye height. And using a camera can be a really useful way of doing that as well, as I was saying in the introduction, because you can position a camera very low and close up to your subject as well. So it's quite a useful thing to do if you can get a subject that's really close up in the foreground and pushing the rest of the landscape back. Maybe it's just some flowers or trees or whatever shapes you might find of interest, you know, a particular interest while you're out wandering around. But get up close to it and push the rest of the landscape back. You know, so just changing the way that you look at it, changing your angle of view. So I hope you have a bit of fun doing that this month. As always, I'm, you know, loving what I see come up on the group. It's fantastic to see everyone working and just finding the community as well there. You know, there's some great discussions and people chatting to each other, which is lovely to see, and that's what it's all about. So I'll see you on the group. Have a great month. Have fun painting.